Good morning, LAPCS scholars. Mr. Rowley here, and today we are going to talk about the New South. Now that Reconstruction is over and it was an abject failure, the world still needed to move on, and the South had to be rebuilt, and this is going to talk about all the things that went into that, or as many of it as I can squeeze into a little PowerPoint. So the New South, this will take us from about 1877 to 1900. All right, here we go. Economic growth. Henry Grady's vision of the New South. Cotton plantations and slavery dominated the Old South's economy. As a result, the region had very few cities and very little manufacturing. Remember, that was one of the weaknesses that the South had against the Union about the North in the Civil War. Henry Grady called for a New South that would be home to thriving cities, bustling factories, and rewarding business opportunities. The beginning of the industrial base. The New South enthusiasts began to promote textile industry. So originally, these things would, products would be sent up from the South to the North, where the North would make these things into something useful. Mills soon flourished in small towns across the Piedmont region of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The number of cotton mills in the South quickly doubled from 161 in 1880 to 400 in 1900. So despite the fact that slavery is no longer around, cotton industry grew even more than it was before. Tobacco had long played an important role in the South's history and economy. James Buchanan Duke in 1885 acquired license to use the first automated cigarette making machine. Within 20 years, Duke's American Tobacco Company produced 80% of the cigarettes that were manufactured in the United States, and a lot of them were exported to other countries and sold. Iron ore mines near Birmingham, Alabama, built the South's third great industry. Founded in 1871, Birmingham quickly became a major industrial center and railroad hub. The city's iron and steel mills led proud boosters to call their city the Pittsburgh of the South. You have to understand that in this time period, Pittsburgh was a massive, an industrial giant. The limits of development. Well, despite the important progress, Grady's dream of diversified Southern economy often did fail. The South continued to be closely tied to cotton, which depleted the soil. Cotton is really hard on the soil that it's grown on. Used unsuccessful sharecropping system and tied the entire region's economy to unpredictable and often falling cotton prices. Despite industrial development, the South remained mostly agricultural, in other words, mostly farms. In 1900, 2/3 of the Southern men still earned their living in farming. Sharecropping encouraged a cycle of debt that tied tenant farmers to the land. The system offered little hope for economic improvement to impoverished Black or white farmers. Sharecropping is when you are given a tract of land on somebody else's farm, and then you farm that land, and you have to give a share to the landowner, and oftentimes people would take advantage of it. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. The disenfranchisement of Black voters. The end of Reconstruction left control of the South to white Democratic Party leaders, known collectively as Redeemers. Their supporters referred to these post-war leaders as Redeemers because they redeemed or saved the South from Republican rule. Redeemers were merchants, politicians who promoted growth based upon industrialization and railroad expansion. At the same time, they cut taxes and reduced state spending. As a result, the Redeemers reversed the gains in public education made during the years of Republican rule. In other words, in a lot of ways, the South was moving backwards. The Redeemers were committed to economic development and to white supremacy. Poor whites did not see impoverished Blacks as fellow victims of economic forces they could not control. Instead, they supported the Redeemers' policy of disenfranchising African American voters. The 15th Amendment prohibited states from denying anyone the right to vote because of race. Redeemer governments used literacy tests and poll taxes to evade the amendment. The problem with this was that, if you remember, most Black people, because they were slaves in the South, could not read. It was illegal for them to learn how to read and write. So a literacy test just made it so that they couldn't vote. And also poll taxes, well, they didn't have enough money to pay for the ability to vote. Poll taxes range from $1 in Georgia to $3 in Florida. However, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but back then it was a lot of money. These tactics worked. During the 1890s, the number of black voters dropped. For example, in 1896, 130,000 blacks were registered to vote in Louisiana. Just 4 years later, the number plunged to just 5,320. By the early 1900s, African Americans had effectively lost their political rights in the South. These are some serious steps back. Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. What happened? In 1890, the Louisiana General Assembly enacted a separate car law requiring railroads in the state to provide equal but separate accommodations for white and colored races. Outraged African Americans in New Orleans formed a committee to challenge the segregation law. In 1892, Homer Plessy, a man who was 1/8 black, tested the law by taking a seat in a train car reserved for whites. When the conductor asked Plessy to move to the Negro car, he refused and was arrested. Judge John H. Ferguson of New Orleans ruled against Plessy's plea that the law violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. When the Louisiana Supreme Court upheld Ferguson's decision, the committee appealed to this case to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against Plessy by a vote of 7-1. The court's decision upheld segregation by approving separate but equal facilities for African Americans. In his famous dissenting opinion, Justice Marshall Harlan argued that the Louisiana law created a badge of servitude that violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. What factors contributed to the Supreme Court's decision? Well, following the Civil War, Southern states enacted black codes, which limited the legal and social rights of African Americans, which prompted Congress to pass the 14th Amendment to protect the civil rights of African Americans. So you think in this time period that it looks like it's going to change for African Americans and for former slaves, but in some ways it did not. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 guaranteed blacks full and equal enjoyment of public facilities. Yet the Supreme Court made decisions that limited protection of African Americans, spreading racial segregation. In 1883, civil rights cases ruled 14th Amendment only applied to state actions that cannot be used to control private individuals or private organizations. This set a legal precedent that would be used in Plessy versus Ferguson. By the 1890s, more and more white Southerners rejected the idea of racial justice. The crash of 1893 and the economic depression raised racial tension. The court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson reflected the ongoing trend toward enacting Jim Crow segregation laws, and we would live with those for many decades after that. We will be definitely getting to the civil rights movement, and it's pretty interesting topic, and it'll really show a lot of conversation that we can have about things that are happening right now in our country. So even though we have a lot of things that are wrong here, we've come a long way since then, but still there's still things that are still not right, still not equal, and we're working to change that. Okay, so make sure you are taking your notes, either you've taken your notes either outline or Cornell style notes, don't forget. And also make sure you refer to your exit ticket and complete that exit ticket, and make sure that I get it. And if I give you feedback on your exit ticket, please take the time to fix it and make it better, and I'll give you a higher grade, So, listen to my feedback, put it into play, get a better grade. All right. Okay. So have a good rest of your day. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you later.